Good morning. So my name is Carla Hogan-Rufels. I'm the Director General for the in Global Affairs Canada in the Partnerships for Development Innovation branch. And I'm the Director General for Inclusive Growth, Governance, Environment, and Innovation. So I'm really pleased to be here this morning to help kick off the, to do the kickoff for this International Development Week session with Journalists for Human Rights. So welcome everyone. I'm just gonna give a few remarks and then I'll be turning it over to Rachel Fulfer, who is the Executive Director for Journalists for Human Rights. So just to kick things off, just to let everyone know that every year around this time, Global Affairs Canada works with its partners in Canada and in the Global South to host an International Development Week, which is meant to showcase the important work that's being done by Canadian organizations and their partners around the world to address global poverty. The theme this year is the global local nexus as it relates to the current health crisis and implications for health delivery, education, and gender equality. We're pleased that Journalists for Human Rights, or we also call them JHR, representatives are with us today to discuss this issue. Judy Cabaria will provide a first-person journalist's account of the impact of COVID-19 on gender equality in Kenya. Judy is a multi-award-winning Kenyan journalist and human rights activist. She is also JHR's Kenya Gender Media Trainer. Judy's presentation will last about 45 minutes, followed by a 15-minute question and answer period, which will be moderated by Rachel. Before we start, let me say a few words about Journalists for Human Rights. JHR is a Toronto-based NGO with extensive experience working with journalists in Africa, the Middle East, as well as in Canada, and with Indigenous peoples to build human rights into their reporting. JHR is recognized as a leading voice in the fight for media freedom and security for journalists. JHR is currently implementing 2 projects with Global Affairs Canada in Africa. The first project is what is called Canada World, and it works in Kenya, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Tunisia, and with Syrian refugees located in Turkey. The project supports local journalists in understanding and using human rights when reporting, with a special focus on women and gender equality. The other project is Mobilizing Media to Fight COVID-19, which trains journalists in 12 African and Middle Eastern countries to ensure fact-based reporting and to verify the target audiences are accessing accurate information in a timely fashion. In the context of today's discussion, JHR recognizes that misinformation and disinformation on COVID could lead to dangerous behaviors. We look forward to hearing from Judy and her first-person journalist account of the impact of COVID-19 on women and women's rights in Kenya. So with that, thank you very much, and I turn it over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Carla. It's great to be here, and thank you so much for that kind introduction. We're thrilled to be doing this and really excited to introduce Judy Cabaria to a Global Affairs audience. She does amazing work, so for me, this is a particular delight. So we will be delving into a series of key themes in JHR's project with Global Affairs Canada, Canada World, Voice for Women and Girls. And we will be looking in particular at the impact of the pandemic on women working in media in Kenya. We will look at its impact on gender-based violence. We will examine the implications for girls' access to education in Kenya and we will look at the issue of human trafficking in a little bit more detail. We will also explore how media coverage of human rights, and in particular of gender rights issues, can help to mitigate some of the impacts of COVID-19 by ensuring that women's rights and voices are at the forefront of the public agenda. Before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation to the little chat box that's on your screen slightly to the right. We will collect the questions and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. And now it is my considerable honor to introduce you to the superb Judy Caberia. Judy is a multi-award-winning journalist and our gender media trainer, as Carla has mentioned. Last December, she was announced the winner of the International Labor Migration Awards for her role in exploring cases of human trafficking through her reporting. She was celebrated for influencing policy and contributing directly to rescuing trafficked women within Kenya and in the Middle East. Judy is a fellow of the U.S. Department of State's Edward R. Murrow Program and a mentor of the U.S. Embassy Kenya Mentorship Program for upcoming female journalists in public universities. So without further ado, let's hear directly from Judy how this pandemic is affecting the rights, lives, and livelihoods of women and girls in Kenya, and what role media can play to mitigate these impacts. Judy? COVID-19, I know, has disrupted many industries, upending the livelihoods of many people while exposing gender disparities and inequalities. How, in your view, has the pandemic impacted the Kenyan media sector, and what have been the implications in particular for female journalists?
Thank you very much, Rachel and Carla, for the introduction. Just to start off, I would like to give you an overview of the Kenyan media, just a landscape for you to understand when we talk about the media and how gender issues, are linked to the media. First, Kenya is quite developed in terms of the media industry. We have about 200 radio stations, 66 television stations, and 4 local dailies. And also we have a lot of users also on social media, and we have around 8.8 million social media users. Internet connectivity is not really bad, and still it's not to their half. At least it's 43% internet connectivity across the country. So a lot of people are consuming media content on the internet, especially on social media, and that's why the media has now moved to utilize the opportunities offered by internet. So a lot of things have really changed. And in terms of regulation, the media in Kenya is regulated by the Media Council of Kenya. Generally, we exercise self-censorship. And again, when you look at the ownership, it's mostly vested on private owners. And because of this private ownership, there's a lot of interference with the independence of how the media operates, because some of these owners are linked to government officials, or some of them are even politicians who own media houses. So we are still grappling with, independence and freedom of the press. And during this time of COVID, a lot of things really changed. And one of the impacts, especially when we talk about the freedom of the media, was a lot of censorship in denying journalists a chance, to access government offices, as well as to access some information. And this, of course, was very difficult. Just to let you know the kind of situation or the kind of environment that the journalists were working on, I'll just talk about the first photo that appears in this presentation. Actually, it was like a night of terror as the police enforced a curfew in Kenya. It started off with excessive use of force, excessive force on civilians. People were physically assaulted, beaten up, and in fact, we had 6 people who were killed, including a child, because police used live bullets on people, and that's how and others were beaten to death. This is according to the report collected by the Human Rights Watch. And because now the journalists were reporting these, widespread violations, the police were not happy in the media doing that work. And as a result, now these kind of attacks were turned against the media. We had journalists physically beaten up. We had some of them, the equipment confiscated. And up to now, we still have journalists who are still looking for justice in the courts, and it becomes very difficult, especially where we are asking the same government or the same police to give us justice. Yet these are the perpetrators and the violators of the rights of the journalists and the rights of the civilians. For example, this is Angela Mwirori. Angela Mwirori is such a popular name in Kenya. She's a news anchor at Capital FM. I worked with her. Angela just left her shift. She was reading news that day, and she has a card written essential services. In Kenya, all media people have a card written essential services, meaning that they're exempted from the curfew hours. And the curfew in Kenya starts from 4 a.m. up to 10 p.m. So at around 9, Angela was just having a barbecue with her friends at a private home. Police came at around 9 p.m., an hour before the curfew hour started. And they started asking, and mostly there were women, they started asking, okay, why are you here? And then they said, it's not yet curfew time. And besides, I'm a journalist, so I'm not supposed to be attacked because I just left work and I'm just having dinner and going home, and it's way before the curfew hours. Angela doesn't speak any Swahili, and so the police asked, why are you speaking a lot of English? Why are you not responding to me in Swahili? Why are you pretending yet you are Moirori? You know, Moirori is a Kikuyu name, so you should know how to speak Swahili. And then she said, I'm sorry, I don't understand Swahili. And then when she asked, why are you, beating us up and it's not yet curfew hours? And, that's when they started attacking her, and you can see where they really targeted. And whenever they attack journalists, especially female journalists, they have, a habit of focusing on the private, what is considered as private here in Kenya. And Angela, we ran from office to office trying to get her justice. To date, we've hit her dead, and up to now, she has not received any justice. So we've gone to the office, the Inspector General of Police, and nothing has happened. But Angela's case is just not unique. It's been such, something that happens quite frequently. Just during COVID-19, another female journalist, Purity Mwambi, who works for Citizen TV. She's like the only few investigative journalists we have in the country. She did a story about how police were corrupt and receiving bribes to allow people, to pass the containment areas where we were not supposed to pass, because we are not supposed to leave Nairobi during COVID-19, because Nairobi was the hotspot of COVID-19. And because of doing this story, Purity Mwambia was trolled online. Like for 2 days, she was trending on Twitter. She was body shamed, her sexuality, do you have kids, a lot of things. So the conversation changed from the story that she had done, a legit story, to focusing on how she looks, how her hair is. She doesn't apply makeup, she doesn't do this and that. So whenever female journalists do something wrong, compared even to our male counterparts, for females, it goes back to, how we look, how our hairs look, whether we are married, whether we are not married. And because of that, Purity was immensely affected by her work. In fact, she was at the verge of resigning, but I told her, Purity, if you resign, so who are you going to leave at the investigative desk? So I really had to work with her, encourage her, meet her a lot of times, and I had to take the phone away from her. I just told her, stop watching anything from the social media. So I'm happy she's back. Even today I was with her this morning and we had a chat, and she's back on her feet and back to doing the stories. But only few women really persevere. And now this one actually introduces us to the next part of my presentation. Again, it's a very sad state here in Kenya when we talk about gender representation in the media. This is a conversation that we've had for so many years. And one of the reasons why we have such a small presentation of women in the media, we have a myriad of challenges that women face. Like you can look from the statistics that we have only, less than 30% of female journalists who are at, holding editorial positions. And, career progression, for some reason, journalists get to a certain level and they have to go on. For example, having been a political journalist, by the time I stopped reporting for Parliament, I was facing a lot of issues. I was at a level where I could have been promoted to head the political desk, but because of so many challenges I received in Parliament, threats, sexual harassment, attacks on my work and all that, I just asked and requested, please, can you get me out of Parliament and take me to do something else? And that's when I decided to venture into investigative reporting. Unfortunately, there are so many women will not have been given that chance to do something else they prefer doing. And that's why they bow out. If they realize this is too much for me, I can't take it, they leave. And that's why most of them leave the newsrooms. prematurely, because also another challenge is motherhood and becoming a wife, getting married and all that. For some reason, this is also used to block women from getting to the same level. Or you are told, oh, you have a boyfriend, soon you'll get married, soon you'll start having kids. So you cannot be an editor because once somebody will work for long, and you say, I'll work for long. And it's like become like normalized. A woman cannot be promoted because very soon she's going to get married and bear kids. But sometimes we argue that, okay, now I have kids, I've finished with giving birth. Now can I get that position that I want? Again, no, these are very difficult decisions to make. The women cannot make such decisions. So it becomes very difficult for the women to rise up to the next level. And besides facing sexual harassment outside from the sources, also within the newsrooms, there's a lot of sexual harassment that is happening. And just recently on Thursday and Friday, we had an engagement, actually training on sexual harassment. We had about 13 journalists who participated in this training. And I was really sad that, these things were happening. What we thought was like a training session, the journalists actually were opening up. I'm going through this. This is happening to me. What can I do? Can you talk to the male colleagues? Can you talk to the editors? Can we have a more practical gender responsive mechanism? Because one of the issues they raised is that when you enter any newsroom in Kenya, the first thing that you meet is gender policy, but it remains on the wall and it remains on the file. It's never been executed. And lack of that, responsive mechanism to, respond directly to the challenges of the journalists, the female journalists, a lot of them are working under pressure. Their performance has gone down. So with time, if the performance is down, so then how do the journalists, the female journalists, get, to the decision-making table? They're already underperforming, and we don't ask, how comes these journalists, they were very good journalists, they were doing so well when they came in, but at some point in life, the performance gets really below average. So without interrogating some of these issues and really trying to tackle what the underlying problems are, then it's still going to be an eyesore for a long time to come. But I'm happy from this sexual harassment training that we had. We've really suggested a couple of recommendations that we plan to embark on. And we are working with the Association of Media Women in Kenya, together with the Journalists for Human Rights. And actually, we've decided, though it looks very difficult, we are going to engage the male colleagues in the newsroom and talk to the editors. And from there, we'll bring all of them together. And then the ladies can open up, because there are some of us who already left the newsrooms. And this is what you want to do. We invite those ones who left the newsroom, those ones who can openly say, this is what you do to us. Then I think we'll be moving to the next level of getting beyond the debate, beyond the discussion, to having the action. So I'm really happy that JHR is leading this course, and I'm more than happy that I'm part of this, that we are able to see this coming up. And again, what happens when we have fewer female journalists at the decision making in the newsrooms to determine the content? Then we have limited and poor coverage of issues that affect women. And just recently, a research that was done, we only see that women are considered as sources at a very low level, and it was just a mere 35% of the total coverage. So again, you can see having fewer women as decision makers in the newsroom. The ripple effect is not covering women or considering women as newsmakers, as experts. And as a result, we also overlook issues that affect women. Just like we'll be talking now, you'll see in the next levels, we'll understand why then it is important to prioritize issues affecting women in the way we cover our news. So now looking at the impact of COVID-19, I have a lot of personal stories to give, but I can say in my 14 years as a journalist, as an editor, I have never come across such intense, widespread, and serious violation against women like what I found during COVID-19. I interacted with the victims directly because I was working on stories on human trafficking. And it was a mixture of GBV, human trafficking, trafficked and sexually harassed, raped, defiled. It was a mixture of everything. And this was really appalling. It was quite heart-wrenching. Of course, fresh in my mind are 3 victims that please, you can kindly allow me to talk about them. One of them is one 11-year-old girl. I met her at the shelter. This 11-year-old girl was very pregnant. She was about to give birth. And we had become friends over time because I would go talk to her from when she came to the shelter house, and we became friends. And so this day I went there. Like, oh, I'm so worried, I'm so stressed. It's giving birth really painful. So you look at this small being, so tiny, so innocent, with this huge stomach, and she's crying, she's heartbroken, and she doesn't even know who did this to her. Up to now, we don't know who defiled her, because he says it was just at night and it was in one of the slums. She had gone out to get some water, but somebody just took her and defiled her. So we don't know who did this to her. Another case is about a 4-year-old girl. She was defiled by her uncle. She was so tiny and, just 4-year-old, she doesn't even know what has happened to her. So we take her to the hospital, get the hospital record, going to record the case with the police, like the police is doing us a favor. I mean, it was just quite a sad process, especially for this girl and the mother and the father. And this is where now the role of journalism goes beyond reporting. For me, it went beyond reporting. And this is where you just know I have to do something more than reporting. And this is why at some point, I think I switched roles and I decided, let me just, help and take these victims at least to see that they get somewhere to stay and they get some justice. But when we went there to the police back and forth, we have this file. At least yesterday I got a report that finally the case will be in Kibera courts. But you can imagine this is something that happened in May last year. But this court has got its way into the court this year. And it's because I'm a journalist and because I said that I am going to write a story, we don't do anything about it. And these are some of, the kind of reporting that we are promoting at JHR, with impact, and where we are actually able to make, impact in people's lives. The third incident is where I had 2 victims of rape. And one night I got a call from a CSO that was completely filled to capacity. And she didn't have a space for the 2 girls. So she told me, who come, we look for a space for these 2 girls. So I left my house, we went to pick the 2 girls. We went to 2 shelter houses. There was no space. They're overwhelmed with victims of DBV, victims of human trafficking, and all these are children. There was no single space. So we ended up going back to the hospital where these girls were receiving treatment, and the nurse offered to go with them at her house. So again, through my reporting, I'll just show you the kind of stories that I did based on human trafficking and the lack of shelter. Again, when you look at the hotline, just to show you how bad the GBV was, especially on women and the girls, we launched a hotline number. And again, this was because of the reporting that was being done in the media. In February, that was before we had the first COVID case in Kenya. The first COVID case in Kenya was reported in March. So in February, before COVID, and when children were at school, we had only 86 calls received. But in June, we had over 1,100 cases reported via the hotline numbers. Again, about the Kenyan data, mind you, these were the only people who called. This means that anybody who never called was not included in this data. Anybody who never went to the hospital was not included in this data. And this is the biggest challenge we have in this country. Without reliable data, it becomes very difficult for us to be able to address some of these issues. And again, the biggest also challenge was not having these cases reported. Actually, there is, oh yes. And again, the challenge that we have, why some people don't even report, is because within the cultural system in our country, it's allowed for the elders to sit down and decide what can we do with the perpetrator. So in a case where a girl has been defiled, or where a girl has undergone female genital mutilation, or a girl has been married off, and the police gets to hear about it, the community says, no, let us sit together as a community, and then we have, we can have an out-of-court settlement. So what is this out-of-court settlement? We call it the kangaroo courts. So if you defiled a girl and she's already pregnant, okay, one of the things is you can marry her and then will not go forward, will not press any charges. So here is a girl who is 12, 13 years old. He gets married off to avoid the court process because probably this is a respected man within the society. Or others are said, okay, you made our girl pregnant, then pay us with this number of cows or give us this amount of cash. So the case ends there. So we have communities in this country, not even communities, even people within the city, especially those ones living in informal settlements, that decide to sort things out of court. And as a result, these cases are not brought forward. These children never get justice, and some of them are married off to people they never made that choice, And so Another biggest challenge we have is lack of awareness among vulnerable groups. In Kenya, a lot of people are not even aware about even GBV being a crime. Some of them are always used to being beaten up. Some women are always being used to being beaten up. They even go to hospital, they get treated, they go back, they're beaten up. So they don't even think it's wrong for them that to happen to them. They think it is, in some communities, they even say it is love. So it is, we really have a huge gap. And this is also what we are trying to do with JHR, to create a lot of awareness. What rights are we talking about? And we have a course within JHR where we teach them about human rights, and we tell them about the local rights, the international rights, the treaties, and making them aware is the first place for them to know they've been violated. Because without knowing this is my right, then it's very difficult for me to know when it has been violated. So this has, has been such a big problem. And now we came to opening the schools this year. Kenya, from March, since we got the first case of COVID-19, schools were shut down. So children have been at home for the last 9 months. They only went back to school in January this year. And actually, I mean, if you look at even the data, within the first 3 months in Kenya, we had recorded about 152,000 teenage pregnancies, which was a 40% increase in Kenya's monthly average. And in fact, based on these statistics and based on this, and you remember, like I said, this is not even the exact, this one is of the people went to the hospital, the people who called. And majority of the people never went to the hospital, never reported, they never went anywhere. So majority of them we don't know, and they were not captured in this data. So based on this data that was released, it was very shocking. In fact, we had a single community, that is Nandi County, which actually had done a research in 2019 between January and September between girls from 10 to 15 years. And we had, they had recorded around 800, not even 800, I think there were about 289 girls in 2019. But at the same period, for girls between the same age, 10 to 15, this year, between January and September, this number had shot up. We had recorded 5,700 girls who got pregnant during COVID period. So you can just see the sharp increase, the upsurge of violations against the girls. We had another county in Machakos, and within the first 3 months, they recorded 4,000 cases. And this was like the trend across all the 47 counties. Even within the city, especially in the slums, all these numbers had tripled, and they had really escalated. Initially, when they were announced, there was a lot of controversy and debate, people saying, no, they're not accurate and all that. Until now, when the schools were reopened, and we realized that thousands and thousands of children were missing. Up to now, thousands of children have not reported back to school. And majority of these children are girls. So again, this shows that actually these pregnancies, the female genital mutilation, the underage marriages, all these have affected the girls' education. And unfortunately, this has really, undone the gains that we had done in getting the girls back to school. We had started this campaign because even before COVID, we had vulnerable children, especially those ones in different communities that practice female genital mutilation, underage marriages, and again, the culture issue that we grow up with, that, girls are not supposed to be educated. So this is what we've been fighting for years. Unfortunately, COVID came, and it's really outdone most of these gains. So it's really a crisis, and that's why now JHR currently, we are giving even grants to journalists to try and start focusing on some of these stories. And just recently, there's a school that opened up in Nyeri, and this school is providing education to teenage mothers. And for me, I think this is exemplary, because if we can feature this school, I'm sure it is going to inspire other schools so that they can start accepting back these girls. Because as we speak now, these girls are trapped in this, sort of, frustration, abuse is still happening. And some of them are still stuck with their perpetrators. That is the saddest part of the affairs. The government, unfortunately, has really not gone to the villages, to the grassroots, to talk about it and to encourage, whether it's the chiefs, the lowest authorities, to ensure they move, even if it's house to house, to start reporting some of these violations. Because like I said, some of the people are not even aware about the rights. They're not even aware about the rights of their children. So if we can really do a lot of reporting, like we're already encouraging through the kind of funding that we are helping the journalists with from Journalists for Human Rights, I believe this is really going to make a big difference. And also join the campaign that has been there. Already the president of Kenya has said pregnant girls should be allowed back to school. So it's up to us, the media, to lead this debate, to tell the schools, please don't turn away these girls, don't discriminate them, don't further violate them. They have already been violated and they're going with a lot of challenges. Another stories, other stories that want to ensure have been reflected in this reporting with the journalists we worked with, is ensuring that when these girls go back to school, they're offered some sort of support, psychosocial support, counseling, because you can imagine somebody who was defiled, raped, has given birth and has gone back to school. And when we start them with mathematics, chemistry, and biology, these children will get tired and they'll leave school. So this is why we also want to influence, the school calendar to ensure that they incorporate psychosocial counseling. And this can only be done through the creation of awareness that will be done by the journalists that they are working with. So this is really going to help us. And I'm sure, for me, I'm a believer of, journalism that can really change things. I've seen me write stories and I've really seen that change happen. So I believe even now, the journalists we are going to work with are really going to do that. So I happen to be doing research and reporting on human trafficking. And this is something I started in March, just before COVID-19 came to Nairobi. Actually, I was on my way to Italy because this is where we were launching this project. So they asked me, okay, then what are you going to do because you can't come to Italy? Then I said, oh, a lot of human trafficking is already happening here, because I told them COVID is here in Kenya, and I know of victims who are in the Middle East. I just want to find out, are these victims coming back to Kenya? What is the government of Kenya doing? And just before we talk about the work that I did, let us look at the statistics that we have. Majority of the victims in Kenya are actually women. And you can see from the statistics that we have, 9 out of every 10 victims are women. Just looking at one type of human trafficking, especially people who are trafficked only to the Middle East for labor and sex exploitation, annually we had a record of about 2,000 women. And so you can imagine out of these two, this, you can imagine some of them are not even adults. They're not even people who are able to make a decision. Again, these are vulnerable women and they're lured, they're told, oh, you are suffering, you don't have a job, come, I'll get you a job in the Middle East. Some of them are promised that when they get to the Middle East, they'll become nursery school teachers. But when they get there, they end up working in brothels, they end up working as house helps under very difficult situations. Some of them, of course, face a lot of, torture. And during this time that we were reporting, we had to do a lot of, raising money, working with the CSOs. And like I said, yes, I would report the story, but I would realize, oh, the story requires me to go beyond reporting to try and push for action. And so for the journalists who are trapped, especially, let me just talk about the ones that are here. The first story that not the first one, among the stories that I wrote, I only selected those ones that had really big impact. One of them is for me to highlight about we don't have state-run shelters for victims of human trafficking in Kenya. For example, here in Kenya, when we rescue victims of human trafficking, especially those ones who are trafficked from Nepal, because we have a lot of them, women trafficked from Nepal, from India to Kenya. So when they come, they are taken to work in brothels, to dance some dance that is called, I can't remember the name, but it's a funny name. And once they're rescued, instead of taking these girls, to a rescue center or offering them any form of support, they are thrown into jail. And so the first story that I had to deal with was to try and help these girls to get out of our cell. And I asked, what crime have they committed? I was told, oh no, these people are, doing, pornographic things. But I said, these are victims, they don't even speak English. These are innocent people who are brought here to work, but they found themselves having been trafficked. And so we just pushed through writing, through reporting, and through working with CSOs. And finally, these girls were released. Unfortunately, there was no shelter for them. So they were repatriated back to Nepal. Again, the problem of not having a shelter and the problem why the issue of human trafficking will continue is because there's no accountability as it should be for the perpetrators. We don't hold them to account because first, we've repatriated the complainants. You know, the people could be there saying, I was lured, I came here and here. So if this person is not there, then how do we secure prosecution and investigation of such cases? So because of these procedural and structural incapacities within our law and within the government, a lot of criminals, the kingpins, the syndicates and the cartels, they work scot-free, and that's why this problem is still persistent. And now, of course, with the COVID-19, we expect the numbers to, to shoot, because now you can imagine so many women lost their jobs. So many of them, they're not able, to like get even the needs, the basic needs, food and all that. So because of this, these women are ready and willing to go, whether you promise them any greener pasture, they'll be ready and willing. So as soon as the international flights open without these restrictions and all that, we expect to see an upsurge, because now we have more vulnerable women who have lost their jobs. And even some are ready to, whether it's anything that they can do to make a living, they're so ready. So after I did this story, first the government said, no, you misreported, we have a lot of shelters. So I told them, can you show me one single shelter that is owned by the government? They kept on mentioning, but I said that one is CSO owned, that one is CSO owned. Actually, they realized we don't have any public shelter, because the problem is you don't have a place where I know if I rescue this person, I can take them to that and that place. So a committee was established, and I'm a member of that committee. And so we've been having discussions on where to set them up. And in fact, we've just launched the first one in a county nearby. It's not far from here. And we hope with time we'll have more of shelters where victims can be taken. Again, victims of human trafficking at risk of COVID-19, as COVID ravages the world. This one I've already spoken about. It's about how I highlighted this story. It was really sad. I used a video, all the combination of multimedia production. And as a result of this, I got tweets and people came up and they were helped with food and the masks. Again, that is the advantage. Again, it's still a problem that they have not been returned back to their places, but it was good enough. They got food and they got support to protect themselves. The other one was agony of victims of human trafficking, trapped in countries of a coronavirus. So these are about the stories that I was talking about, the ones who are caught up in the Middle East. They were thrown on the streets. They didn't have anywhere to go. And we worked together with the CSO that is owned by the Catholic Church here in Kenya. And we managed to get so many of them back, maybe 3 at a time, 5 at a time. And by the time I was done with the story, at least 15 of them were back. And I was happy to meet some of them early in the year in January. One of them is such a young girl, 22-year-old, who had been recruited to go and work as a nursery teacher, but she ended up, dancing and, performing for the family of men. So it's always good and really fulfilling when journalists do stories and they see impact of their stories. And so because having, yes, Rachel?
Just on that point, just looking at the extraordinary work that you have been doing, Judy, where as a result of this coverage and the ongoing dialogue with the relevant people in the government and the cabinet minister, you were able to put the issue on the agenda, get the government to respond, show the government that there was a gap in the service provision, that they were not providing shelters for victims of human trafficking. And now you're working in dialogue with the government to ensure that those shelters are placed where they need to be placed. And that is so much the theory of JHR's work in action, that if you can set the agenda, ensure that there's awareness on which rights are being violated, engage the duty bearers in order to address the violation and provide redress. It's a fantastic example of the kind of work that we aim to support through this kind of programming with Global Affairs. Anyhow, I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but I just wanted to highlight the magnitude of that achievement, and that this is an ongoing iterative process. And also to segue, because you have very clearly illustrated the role that the media can play in ensuring that women and girls issues are prioritized during the pandemic, especially. What recommendations would you have to ensure that this work has the desired impact?
Yes, one thing that JHR is doing, and I'm really happy to be part of this process, is the fact that we've been taking journalists through training So far, we've engaged over 60 journalists, including the media managers, including the decision makers at the table. And through this engagement that we've been having, promoting the human rights reporting, gender sensitive reporting, what is rights media, ethics and all that. This is what we've been doing from last year, and up to now we are still talking and discussing even the issues about sexual harassment that we just did last week. And through the reporting of these journalists, we'll be able to raise awareness, because media is very instrumental, in doing this work. Actually, I find the work of the media as the most important leakage that we have. Apart from just writing and creating that awareness, we can be able to influence policy, because it's not just a matter of just changing, one person's story, but it's about, yes, you can change that person's story, but through the story of the victims, the case studies, it can be used by the government to be able to come up with, policies and laws that can be able to ensure these problems do not occur in future. So in our training, we are trying to encourage journalism that is issue-oriented. If it's to criticize, we critique with a purpose, because it's that critiquing for us to point out where the gaps are, so that those who are supposed, the duty bearers who are supposed to take action, then can do it, because sometimes we pretend they don't know that this is happening. So it's for us, the media, to show us this is happening. And this is why we keep on growing our population. Just around 60 is what we have. But by the end of this year, I'm sure this number will be more than 100, because we have a lot of stories already proposed by, the first and the second cohorts of the journalists. And probably before the end of the month, we are really going to have a huge number of stories discussing about different issues. And in the kind of training that we do, including the round table meetings that we have, which is one of the other important things that we need, is having a discussion and having a discourse. We've already been discussing about the 2-thirds gender rule. 2-thirds gender rule is where we are pushing for to ensure that elective positions do not have more than 2-thirds of one gender. Because currently, yes, women are the ones who are, underrepresented. But in future, we don't know what we'll be talking about. And one of the things that JHR has done is to ensure people understand what is gender, because there's been a perception that gender is women. So instead of the people, the media saying 2-thirds gender rule, they try to make it 2-thirds women role. And because of that, the process has been politicized, the debate has been lost, and it's been, no, we can't give the women positions of power, we can't dish them out. So through JHR, we've been able to clarify gender means both men and women. And because of this kind of, correcting misconceptions through reporting of the journalists that we are working with, we've had engagement with the editors, and we've brought experts to talk also about the constitutional referendum that we're expecting in the coming months. And in it is the provision for the 2-thirds gender rule. And through this engagement, then it's been possible for them to understand basically their role. And through this reporting, it's really going to change a lot of things. Another thing we are doing as Journalists for Human Rights is to empower the journalists with skills and knowledge. And what we are trying to encourage them, because we are working with the grassroots journalists at the lowest level, at the communities, at the slums, at the remotest parts of the world, of the country, because some of the places are really remote. And the problems are quite unique. When you talk about gender representation, in some places, we have a place where a woman cannot carry a national ID. This is the husband who's supposed to keep it. So the problems are different. And because we are working with different journalists, all these stories are able to come to the fore. And through this censorship and opening through this awareness, at least we are bringing the discussion table. Again, we are offering grants to journalists, and this is what is also encouraging. Like I said, so many of them lost their jobs during COVID. We had 400 journalists lose their jobs during COVID, and majority of them, unfortunately, again, were women, and the same reasons. So your husband is earning some money, or you have a boyfriend who can help you, so you get layoff or you get a pay cut. So again, female journalists lost their jobs, and that's why in all the work that we do, whether it's training, whether it's giving story grants, we are really prioritizing to ensure that female journalists actually, are actively involved, and that, at least they're given a priority, because they're quite underrepresented, and they're the majority who have suffered of these consequences of COVID-19. We've also already done a CSO engagement, because part of our work with JHR is to work with different stakeholders. We've already had a training with the civil society groups, and what we were trying to show them is how to engage the media effectively and constructively, because we've realized CSOs are doing a lot of work, but they don't know how to, get their work out. They don't know how to get their issues heard. If they're talking about female genital mutilation, how do they effectively then use the media? And next, we are hoping the coming days, we are now going to bring the journalists and the CSO groups that we trained together. So that's now the journalists can say, oh, you CSO people like to use this technical language. Can you simplify the data for us? Can you simplify the language for us? So this exchange is going to promote a closer working relationship and partnerships between the media and the journalists we are working with and the CSOs, as the same as the government. The last time we had an engagement with the editors, they proposed that you also reach out to police, because they said you are teaching us about human rights, but you're not talking to the violators or the people who are supposed to protect those human rights. And this is another space we've created at JHR. We allowed them to bring their input, because I think the best approach you can use is ensuring they say what actually needs to be done and pointing out at those issues, we're able to address them at JHR.
That is wonderful, Judy. And there's so many aspects of our work that you have beautifully illustrated in your presentation. The piece about situating men in the center, not in the center of the conversation, but bringing men into the conversation so that they can be part of the solution. Conversations around engaging civil society organizations and providing that networking space, but also working with the police and likely in the future also security services. We did that work very effectively in South Sudan. We're exploring that approach in DRC and Mali as well, and making sure that all those who are part of these problems understand what's going on and how they can actually start to become more part of the solution. I'm going to hand it over to Carla Hogan-Rufeld, who I think is going to kick us off with questions. Carla, it's over to you once Yash brings you on.
Great. Yeah, thank you very, very much. Judy, what an incredibly powerful presentation. Very, very rich and very, very powerful. Really bringing home the very much bringing home the impact of COVID on gender equality and women's rights in Kenya. And what came through as well is just that perseverance and commitment that you and your fellow female journalist colleagues have. That's coming through really, really strongly. So I've been asked to kick off the Q&A session with a question. I think a lot of elements of my question came out in the presentation, but in the context of gender equality and women's rights in Kenya and the impact of COVID on gender-based violence and teen pregnancy, reduced access to school for girls, human trafficking. Can you speak a bit more about how you measure the impact of the results of your reporting? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. One of the things that actually makes a journalist feel happy that I did a good story is the kind of feedback that comes through. For example, if you talk about a school that is giving space for teen mothers to go back to school, and the headmistress calls and said, "Oh, I have received so many calls because you wrote the story and you highlighted the work that we are doing, and we got this CSO to come on board to support us." And the good thing now with social media, most of them, once we tweet the stories, they always tag the journalist or tag the media house or even tag JHR because of the work that we are doing. And so for us, that is impact, because through highlighting that story, we've inspired, probably a woman who was afraid to take her daughter back to school because of stigma. But through the media, this mother has heard that there's a space where her daughter can still go continue their education without the stigma that they're facing in the normal schools. Again, is when community starts engaging in conversation and talking about, the issues that have been reported over time. Like in Kenya, the grassroots and the community media houses that work mostly in the slums. For example, when we talk about ensuring that, like now we are talking about that's gender role, like elective positions for women who go, at the top positions. But what does this story mean for the local woman who has a small business that is selling vegetables? What does that mean? Because she has no plans of vying for a political seat. So this is when now the journalist now comes and starts saying, a woman can be a leader within where they are. For example, in Kibera, this is a story that a journalist did, and a group of women came together and they were contributing $1. I think it was less than $1 per day, per month. And there were 10 women. And at the end of the day, the women that were giving that testimony says, now I can be able to buy food because I got this money, because I would contribute and give one woman like that. And throughout the 10 months, all of them didn't miss food because they were sharing and borrowing each other loans. And because of this, the women were saying, oh, thank you so much for highlighting our story. And so other women hear this story and they say, we are also going to start our own group so that we can ensure that our kids are not going hungry and we are not sleeping hungry. So because of the impact of that work and empowering the local voices, and this is why we are working with the grassroots media, especially here with JHR, we are really concentrating so much on the community media. Because first they use a language that the people understand, because they use vernacular, they use Sheng, and people are able to understand the simplest form of journalism, whether it's political debate, whether it's constitution, which is very complex, then the journalist gets to feel very proud because they hear people now able to talk and understand. When you talk about gender, now they know it's not, gender does not mean only women. Actually, it's very impressive that you train the journalists and then you hear them talking on radio saying, call and tell me what you think about gender. And there's a teaser there. Then we know, of course, there's an impact there, and now people understand gender more. For us, I think that is when we say this is the impact of journalism, because through that reporting, we've changed lives of so many women. We've changed lives of, children. Probably some of them, like the one who didn't have a school, now has a school to go. And again, the government again hits to the call. And that's where you see like the story I did about of lack of shelters. I was called, I sat at that table, and besides even doing the story, I was recognized internationally for, doing that story and so many others for the work that I did, even though it looked like boring stuff. When I was doing it, the first time the editor at Capital FM said, these are very serious. They're boring, they don't have hits. But he's realized the kind of people that are following and the kind of impact that came back. This is when the owner of the station said, congratulations, you've done us proud. We are getting response from so many people. So I believe it's not just always about popularity or about winning an award or about an exclusive story, but it's about doing a story for the sake of, bringing positive impact in the community. And through that journalism, a lot of things have changed. In Kenya, we've had a story of girls using feathers for sanitary pads. And the story was done on TV. And now a lot of projects have come trying to, come up with the made pads that they can use and wash. But still, we have girls who still cannot go to school because they don't have pads. So it shows that we still have got to tell these personal stories of girls speaking where they cannot go to school, where they have to keep on missing schools at this certain time of the month. So this is why we need repeated reporting until the policy is changed that girls can even be given pads in school, because the poverty levels are still very high.
Yeah, the follow through is so important. Yeah. Excuse me, we still have a couple of minutes for questions, and Judy, I think you've stunned the audience into silence with this extraordinary presentation, because at the moment we don't have questions from the box. So please, those who do have queries, put them into the chat box. I know that Carla had a couple of other questions. So Carla, if you want to share those questions, vas-y. Judy has an extraordinary wealth of knowledge to share, as is evident from this presentation. So let's faut en profiter.
Sure. So another question would be, and I think you just touched on it a little bit as well, Judy, but in the world where social media is increasingly prevalent, how can journalists work to dispel myths?
Yes, actually, because of the censorship, for example, we have and lack of independence, sometimes we do stories that are so serious and disturbing or touching on politicians, and the media houses do not run these stories. I can give you my own personal story. I've done a story about a top company in this country that was draining its wastage, that is dirty water, to a slum, and so children were dying before they would get to the age of 5. So I used like around 2 weeks investigating this piece of work. And when I went, I put it on the Capital FM website, the story. I just went to the washroom, I came back, I found the story was not on the website. So I asked, what is happening? I was asked, do you know who is the owner of that company? It is our boss at Capital FM. So I'm like, okay, where do I take this story? I decided, you know what? I put it on social media. And so in a way, social media has become the extra voice where we can be able even to have conversations, because after I put this story up, there was a lot of interaction, feedback. So journalists are able to, directly interact with the audiences. And for me, social media, I think it's extra audiences that you're able to reach. So for example, instead of just having the story heard on radio or just having the story on websites, sharing it on Twitter, on WhatsApp, on, Facebook, there's a lot of, audiences that we were not able to reach before. And another thing that happened, especially during this COVID period, there were a lot of misconceptions about COVID-19. Everybody at some point was saying, I have COVID. Everyone had the symptoms. Everybody, and people were giving solutions. So if you take lemon with this, if you take this drug, if you take, so there was abuse of drugs. And through social media, actually, we were able to start having conversations as journalists, and everybody came there to put links with the evidence. And this really helps. So social media has been the extra advantage, but again, it's been also abused, especially to troll on journalists who they determine as not friendly. Like I've told you the case of this female journalist who was body shamed with, photoshopped photos on social media. And so it's good, it's bad. So it's just a matter of, but I think the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. But again, this is why we are also trying to address online harassment, especially of female journalists. Female journalists, the news anchors, they're told when the body increases in size. Recently, the communications manager, State House, just came from maternity leave. And she had, of course, you can imagine what comes with motherhood. And she was trolled for 2 days. Oh, she's become an elephant. What are they eating with the president? But nobody talks about when the president's tummy is big because he's a man. So again, social media has become another side weapon that has been used to fight journalists. And it's happened to so many of the journalists. And also, these are some of the things also we are trying to discuss, and how media houses even can be able to handle some of these stories. Because like the story for Purity Mwambia, she was harassed online, but did the media house do anything to cancel her? Did they offer her any type of counseling to even support her? They didn't. That's why she has to look for alternatives. And so social media has been a blessing and a curse in some way.
Yeah. We've done a fair bit of research, both in our African programs and our Middle East programs on this issue. And one of the things that we're seeing is a real need for work with the management and the HR departments of these organizations in order to provide journalists, female journalists, with support and tools. And one of the best examples comes from a domestic example, APTN, where there was so much harassment of Indigenous female journalists online that ultimately the CEO, John LaRose, issued a declaration that harassment, he would take such harassment as a criminal act, and that the person who was committing the harassment would be liable to prosecution by APTN. That did help to address the issue, but it is an issue that is endemic everywhere, and we're also working on this in Kenya with these discussions with these mostly male bosses, so that they have an understanding of what these women face when they are being put out into the social media universe like this.
Rachel, one thing I forgot to tell you is that from the female journalist training that we had on Thursday and Friday, one of the recommendations is for us to have an independent committee made up of JHR staff and Association of Media Women in Kenya. That's journalists, when they receive, female journalists receive this kind of harassment, then they can come report to us, and then we can see how we can engage, without interfering with the internal affairs of the newsroom, but ensuring that actually these journalists have a place where they can go and be told whether it's harassment. We can tell them how to behave, how probably we can be able to handle it, nicely, so that they don't have to leave work or stop reporting because of this harassment. So that is one of the proposals and recommendations that came out of this sexual harassment training that we just concluded last week.
Amazing. Very powerful. Okay, well, thank you so much, Judy, for this excellent opportunity to hear directly from you about the incredible, life-changing, system-changing, government-changing work that you are doing on issues like human trafficking. Because yes, when I was a journalist, if I went to my editor and said, I'm pitching human trafficking, he'd be like, okay, and how, and with what angle, and just to see the way in which these kinds of issues can be put at the forefront of the public agenda, and where you can really work as a journalist with that platform to engage the civil society organizations, to engage the relevant stakeholders in government, and together to create a dialogue around how to develop solutions that work for the people whose issues are being highlighted. And when you talked about the work that we're doing with the grassroots journalists, and that is so critical, because one of the core elements of our philosophy is making sure that not only is there awareness, but that there are discussions around solutions that are accessible to the communities that are most directly affected. Doing that work across multiple languages is so, so critical at that level. I'm hugely looking forward to hearing further what you're going to be doing with the program as we build out more the work engaging male allies in newsrooms, as mentioned, the work on sexual harassment, the work on making those policies live, and the work that you're doing aside from that, where you're providing this safe space for women to be engaging and speaking with one another. But we are now sadly out of time. We're exactly at 12. So thank you so much, Judy, for all your passion and your powerful engagement with this work. It's incredibly inspiring, and I'm looking forward very much to the coming chapter. And thank you so much, Carla, and Global Affairs also for supporting this International Development Week webinar.
Thank you, Rachel, and Judy. Thank you very, very much.